Remember that the first part of this was a review of what we already talked about with Samaria, with Jesus in Samaria and the woman at the well. And we saw the misunderstanding of the disciples. I prefer misunderstanding to ignorance of spiritual truth. Certainly, Jesus' concerns were not the disciples' concerns. They had concerns that were temporal, that were earthly, and Jesus' concerns were eternal. And so he taught them about how the harvest is ripe, how we can bring people to Christ and they can be saved, and we can sow that seed and it can be reaped in the same time, just like it was with the woman and with the whole Samaritan village as well. So then we talked about this miracle, and I'm going to read this, and then we'll go through quickly the parts that we've already talked about. So after the 2 days in Samaria, Jesus departed for Galilee. For Jesus himself had testified that a prophet has no honor in his own hometown. So when he came to Galilee, the Galileans welcomed him, having seen all that he had done in Jerusalem at the feast. So for they too had gone to the feast. So this is interesting, right? Jesus says that a prophet has no honor in his hometown, but then it says the Galileans welcomed him. So I don't know if your curriculum is saying that he wasn't received well. That might be true. It doesn't really read that way. It may be the opposite. It may be like he generally people a prophet is without honor only in his hometown, but in Jesus' case he wasn't. It's hard to tell because it doesn't say anything about him being mistreated or not accepted or something like that. So he came to again to Cana in Galilee, where he had made the water wine. And at Capernaum there was an official whose son was ill. When this man heard that Jesus had come from Judea to Galilee, he went to him and asked him to come down and heal his son, for he was at the point of death. So Jesus said to him, "Unless you see signs and wonders, you will not believe." The official said to him, "Sir, come down before my child dies." Jesus said to him, "Go, your son will live." The man believed the word that Jesus spoke to him and went on his way. As he was going down, his servants met him and told him that his son was recovering. So he asked them the hour when he began to get better, and they said to him, "Yesterday at the 7th hour the fever left him." The father knew that was the hour when Jesus had said to him, "Your son will live." And he himself believed, in all his household. This was now the second sign that Jesus did when he had come from Judea to Galilee. So we talked about the setting and that he was leaving this revival in Samaria to go to a spiritual wilderness. Might be a little bit strong wording there for Galilee, but certainly there wasn't the revival that was going on in Samaria. And he went to Cana again, and he meets this nobleman. And we talked about the fact that he was not exempt from sorrow because of rank or riches. Sorrow comes to both the wealthy and those who are poor. And then now we're going to talk about he had a measure of faith in Christ. So I would say he had more than a measure of faith in Christ. He had obviously heard about Jesus because he sought Jesus out. Yes. No, you need to say. So he had sought Jesus out, and he had come a long way to do that. So I'm going to talk to you about that, so I'm going to modify again a little bit what the curriculum is saying. His faith definitely grew, right, after the miracle. But I would say that he had a good deal of faith to begin with. So this is the picture I showed you in your book, and this is the Sea of Galilee up here. And Capernaum is right about there at the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. And Cana is on the other side of this. So he would have had to walk quite a way. So there's Capernaum, and Cana is over here. And so that would have been at least 5 hours of walking to get from Capernaum to Cana. Now, back in that day, there were no cars, there were no bicycles, there were, so people walked everywhere. But I don't know who would be willing to walk 5 miles to go see, right? I mean, I think he did. If he didn't think that Jesus could help him, he wouldn't have made that walk. That's a rough walk in that terrain. That's a really rough walk, and I don't think he would have done that unless he had at least some faith. And we hear that he got there at the 7th hour, so that would have been roughly 1 o'clock. So he would have had to start fairly early in the morning to get there, and he would have climbed steep hills to get there. So I believe he did have a measure of faith. I think it's a journey that someone would only take if they did believe in some sense. But as I mentioned, his faith grew. He became a follower of Christ, as did his entire household. When he went home and told the story, they all became followers of Christ. So whatever faith he had, his encounter with Jesus caused that to grow. And it wasn't just, he believed even before he found out that his son was healed. So it wasn't just because Jesus did a miracle that he believed. So I'm sure his servants were like, "How did you know that?" And he said, "Because Jesus told me. That's all I need. I trust what Jesus said." So he was not exempt from sorrow because of rank, and his son was not exempt from suffering by age. He was young, right? Look, sickness and death come to the young as well as the old. I'm sure that each of us could give examples of that. I don't know if it was this class. It wasn't. My next youngest sister was supposed to die when she was born. The doctor said she's not. She was born blue. APGAR is this test. It's like 0 to 10. 10 is a perfect baby. There aren't many 10s. I think Josh was an 8, 7, 8. And my sister was a 2. She wasn't breathing. She was blue. And they said she wouldn't live. But then she lived. And then the reason she has the same name as my mother is my mother thought, I need to give my child something before she dies. And so she then she lived. And so they said, well, she's going to be profoundly mentally and physically handicapped, but she will live. And she had these seizures. And so they sent my mother home at some point and said, come back and we'll teach you how to care for her when she has her seizures. And so they went home. And the next morning, my mom was praying at her prayer bench, which is now in my sister's home, the same sister. She was praying for Georgianne on her prayer bench. And the phone rang. And she heard my father say, you're kidding. Really? And here's what the doctor said. There's been a miracle in the night. Come pick up your perfect. And indeed, Georgianne is probably the most intelligent human being I personally know. When God heals something, He does it. But she wasn't exempt from suffering sickness and death come to both the old and the young. In fact, who was the first grave ever dug for? Yeah, King Louis, and he was young. None of us knows what's going to happen. I had a student at Millard North who was in a parking lot. She was driving, and she got in an accident in a parking lot. She wasn't wearing her seatbelt, and the car door flew open, and she fell out and hit her head on the concrete. And she, at 17. We don't know. We're not promised. None of us is promised. And this young man would probably not have lived apart from Christ intervening. So remember when I talked to you about Nicodemus, and I talked about how am I ready? I'm ready for Jesus. I think we need to be ready, no matter how old we are. When I was an FCA leader, there was this, I think it was a song, actually. And the kind of tagline of it was, live like you'll die tomorrow, die knowing you're in it. And that's what stuck with me, to live like I'll die tomorrow and die knowing that I'll live forever. And so that would be my admonition to you, that if you haven't been taking your faith seriously, if you are like I was in 10th grade and saying, yeah, I'll get around, I wouldn't. There's no reason. Because we never know what happens. Father, thank you for the truth of your word. Thank you that you have made a way, that you went to great lengths to save us, not just on the cross, yes, on the cross, but from the manger to the empty tomb. You went to great lengths to save us. May we never take that. Love you, gracious. Okay, I'm going to give you the chapter 12 quiz.